Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this, I don't know, this expectation of precision, right? Like, it feels almost like engineering.
Right, yeah, very mechanical.
Exactly. You break your arm, they take an X-ray, and it shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is.
Broken or not broken?
Yeah, it's clean. And, I mean, if you think about it, we've built our entire modern understanding of healthcare around that exact feeling of certainty.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply comforting for us.
Right. You get sick, you go to a sterile building, an expert identifies the problem with some, complex machine or lab test. They hand you a pill, and you get better.
We like things to be visible. We want them categorized. And most importantly, we want them fixable with a standardized protocol.
But, and this is what we're getting into today, step into the world of antimicrobial resistance. And that whole system, that X-ray machine isn't just broken, it is actually the source of the danger.
Yeah, that is the terrifying reality. The sterile building itself is the vector. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So today, for you listening, we are looking at an existential threat to humanity, but also, thankfully, a really groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting solution.
Right.
We are diving deep into an urgent audio report today, and we are pulling from a massive stack of documents. We've got global health data from the WHO, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, and the extensive, 40-year life's work of Dr. Kadiyali Srivatsa.
It's an incredible body of work.
It really is. And this deep dive is effectively a direct plea to global leaders, specifically the Nobel Committee, because according to the World Health Organization, we are officially entering what they call a post-antibiotic era.
Yeah, and that phrase alone, post-antibiotic era, it should give everyone pause.
It sounds like science fiction.
It does, but it's happening right now. For a century, we've relied entirely on this doctor-centric model. You feel sick, you go to a physician, they run a test, give you a diagnosis, hand you an antibiotic, and you go home.
Yeah. But the global antimicrobial resistance, or AMR rates, they have surpassed a really critical threshold. We are sitting at 46% right now.
Oh.
And we're racing towards 60% by 2030.
That's just a few years away.
Exactly. So that old doctor-centric model, it is collapsing under the weight of basic evolutionary biology. The drugs are simply failing.
So like the simple scratch you get working in the garden, or, the common cough your kid brings home from school, things that modern medicine almost thoughtlessly cures today.
Yeah.
Those are on track to become lethal tomorrow, which is just, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. But that's why it requires a fundamental shift in how we approach healthcare. The new paradigm, it cannot be test, diagnose, and treat anymore. It has to be prevention, protection, and heal.
Right. So imagine waking up with a fever and knowing that going to the hospital might actually be the most dangerous choice you could make. What do you do? That's exactly what we are going to unpack for you today.
And to really understand the mechanics of this solution, we have to look closely at the scale of the failure happening right now.
Hit us with the numbers. How bad is it?
Okay, so in 2019, this massive study by the Global Research on Antimicrobial Resistance came out, and they estimated that AMR was directly responsible for 1.27 million deaths globally.
Wait, 1.27 million in a single year?
In 1 year. And, that is a very specific metric. That is not people dying with AMR while succumbing to a car crash or something else.
Right.
That is people dying because the infection was resistant to all available drugs.
Yeah, that is chilling.
Yeah.
And the projections for the future in these documents are just staggering. By 2050, the models indicate AMR could cause up to 39 million deaths.
Yeah.
And alongside that massive human cost, we're looking at a projected toll on the global economy of like $1 trillion and a drop in global average life expectancy by 1.8 years.
Decades of modern medical advancements, right? Extending the human lifespan. Suddenly it's reversing course.
Completely going backward. And we also need to talk about where this is hitting hardest, right? Because it's not distributed equally around the world.
No, not at all. In the EU and the European Economic Area, the ECDC reports about 35,000 people die annually as a direct consequence of these infections.
Okay.
But when you look globally, the geographic hotspots map directly to areas of high population density and developing infrastructure.
Which makes sense.
Right. So Western Sub-Saharan Africa currently bears the highest burden. and South Asia. They are projected to see 11.8 million AMR-related deaths between 2025 and 2050.
11.8 million deaths. I mean, just think about what that means for the infrastructure of a region like South Asia. We aren't just talking about individual tragedies here.
No.
We are talking about the complete collapse of local healthcare systems. If a hospital in Mumbai or Dhaka is suddenly flooded with thousands of patients who have completely untreatable infections, the entire ward essentially becomes a quarantine zone.
Exactly. Everything stops. You can't perform routine surgeries.
Right, you can't deliver babies safely. The foundational floor of medicine just falls out.
Which brings us to this pervasive and honestly incredibly dangerous mindset that the data heavily criticizes. And that is this idea of theoretical idealism.
Oh yeah, the documents really go after this.
They do, because there is this entrenched belief among, politicians, major investors, pharmaceutical executives. They all think we can simply invent our way out of this crisis.
Right, like they assume if we just throw enough billions of dollars at a laboratory, we will magically discover a new, invincible antibiotic.
Exactly. It's a blind faith in a magic pill. But here's the reality. We are trying to out-evolve nature in a laboratory. And nature has a massive head start.
Yeah, billions of years of a head start.
Right. So you look at the pipeline for new antibiotics, and it has effectively collapsed. I think there were maybe 18 to 20 expected new antibiotics in development globally.
That's it, for the whole world.
That's it. And the entire system has stalled.
Wow. So why is the pharmaceutical industry failing to produce the one thing we need most right now?
Well, it comes down to a combination of evolutionary biology and, honestly, economics.
Yeah.
Developing a single new antibiotic is a monumental task.
Sure.
It can take 10 to 15 years of research, clinical trials, regulatory hurdles, and it costs upwards of $1 billion.
Right. But if it saves the world, shouldn't they do it?
You'd think so. But bacteria and fungi are not static targets. They mutate rapidly. By the time a new drug finally clears a decade of trials and hits the market, the pathogens have already begun adapting to it.
Because bacteria engage in something called horizontal gene transfer, right? I read that in the notes and it blew my mind. They don't just pass resistance down to their offspring.
No, they don't.
They literally hand it to each other, like they're trading cards or something.
That is exactly what happens. They share plasmids, which are essentially little like USB drives of genetic code.
Wow. USB drives of resistance.
Right. They share them with neighboring bacteria. So if one bacterium figures out how to survive a new antibiotic, it can pass that survival manual to entirely different species of bacteria nearby. The mutation spreads exponentially.
That's terrifying.
From a pharmaceutical business perspective, it is an absolute nightmare. You spend $1 billion on a drug, and within a few years, it's obsolete. There is no long-term return on investment, so the companies they abandon the research.
So we are literally trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon while completely ignoring the gaping hole in the hull.
Yes.
And that hole is human behavior. Across a global population that's nearing 8 billion people, we are actively training these pathogens to be stronger.
We really are.
Just look at the data from the pandemic. The sources showed that antibiotics were prescribed for over 90% of COVID patients admitted to some hospitals.
Which is madness.
Total madness.
Yeah.
COVID is a viral infection. Antibiotics do absolutely nothing to combat a virus.
They do nothing to the virus, but they do immense damage to the patient's microbiome.
Right.
Every time an antibiotic is used unnecessarily, it acts as a selective pressure. It wipes out all the weak, susceptible bacteria in your body, and it leaves behind only the mutants, the ones that happen to have a natural resistance.
And then they just take over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With the competition gone, those resistant superbugs multiply rapidly. Fungi like Candida auris are doing this too. They're proving to be incredibly resilient, surviving on surfaces for weeks and just shaking off intense antifungal treatments.
Well, it's like forced natural selection. And at that, the environmental pollution from these mass-prescribed drugs being excreted and entering our water systems, plus inappropriate patient practices, like people self-medicating or sharing leftover pills.
Yeah. We're basically running a global boot camp for superbugs.
We really are.
Yeah.
Which leads us to a deeply unsettling reality about our healthcare infrastructure. And I want you listening to really hear this part. If the drugs are failing, our ingrained human instinct is to seek out an expert, right?
Always. You feel sick, you experience a symptom you don't understand, and fear kicks in.
Yeah.
And fear acts as a massive public health multiplier. It drives you directly to the waiting room.
But the sources make it clear that this panic-driven utilization of healthcare facilities is catastrophic right now.
Ah.
Because when you walk into a hospital today, you aren't just walking into a place of healing anymore.
No, you are not.
You are walking into a concentrated reservoir of multi-drug-resistant organisms.
The colonization rates are just terrifying. The data shows that in some regions, up to 83% of people in hospitals.
Wait, 83%?
Yes, 83%. And that includes the doctors, the nurses, the support staff, the visitors. They are colonized with AMR bacteria.
And they don't look sick.
Exactly. They might be completely asymptomatic. Their immune systems are keeping the bacteria in check so they don't look or feel ill, but they are carrying the superbugs on their skin, in their respiratory tracts, on their clothes.
Oh my God.
Globally, the World Health Organization estimates that 7 to 10% of hospitalized patients acquire a healthcare-associated infection simply by being in the building.
Just by walking through the doors. That means if you go to the hospital because you need stitches for a cut, or you're visiting a relative, you are sitting in a room where 8 out of 10 people breathing the same air and touching the same door handles are carrying bacteria that our strongest drugs cannot kill.
We have to examine the physical mechanics of a ward round to understand how this spreads so efficiently.
Okay.
Picture a busy nurse or a doctor. They are moving from room to room constantly. They do not have the time to shower or entirely change their scrubs between every single patient interaction. It's impossible.
Right, they're overworked as it is.
So they touch a patient, they touch their stethoscope, they lean against a bed rail, and then they walk straight into the next room. They inadvertently become highly efficient human vectors, transporting microscopic pathogens across the entire facility.
And it isn't just the staff. I was looking at a really specific cross-sectional study in the documents. It was out of Benaja National University in Palestine, and they focused entirely on radiology departments.
This is a fascinating study.
It really is. Because when you picture an X-ray room, you picture this cold, highly sterile, tightly controlled environment.
Right.
It feels like it should be the cleanest room in the building.
It definitely looks clean, but functionally, a radiology department is a massive intersection for the entire hospital.
Oh, this makes sense.
Yeah. Patients from the intensive care unit, from the emergency room, from the general wards, they all eventually pass through radiology.
Right.
So the study demonstrated that the equipment in these rooms, specifically things like the X-ray cassettes that are placed directly under patients, the imaging tables, the machinery itself, they serve as massive reservoirs for these multi-drug-resistant organisms.
Now, I know exactly what you listening might be thinking right now, because we all just lived through a global pandemic, right? We learned all about PPE, personal protective equipment.
Right. The masks and gowns.
Exactly. Masks, isolation gowns, bleach, industrial sanitizers. Surely, if a hospital is rigorous enough, they can just clean their way out of this surface contamination, right?
Well, that is precisely the assumption that Dr. Srivatsa dismantles in his research.
Okay, break that down for us.
He explains the physical reality of why standard cleaning protocols are failing against these specific superbugs. PPE alone is completely insufficient because these bacteria spread through direct touch and with the assistance of vectors that are nearly impossible to eliminate with standard wiping.
He specifically highlights the actions of hospital porters and cleaning staff, doesn't he?
He does. They are given strong industrial chemicals to clean the floors and equipment, but in a rushed hospital environment, they are often just wiping away the visible dirt.
Like a quick spray and wipe.
Exactly. They spray, they wipe, and they move on to the next room. But at a microscopic level, the bacteria remain anchored to the surfaces. The metal bed rails, the plastic trays, they stay bound via hydrostatic pressure.
Okay, hydrostatic pressure. Explain that like I'm 5.
Basically, hydrostatic pressure in this context creates a localized microscopic suction effect.
Like a vacuum.
Sort of. The moisture and the physical structure of the bacteria bind them tightly to the microscopic grooves of the surface. A simple, quick swipe of a rag does not break that physical bond.
Wow.
To actually kill the pathogen, the chemical requires a specific, uninterrupted exposure time. Sometimes it needs to remain wet on the surface for 10 or 15 minutes.
And nobody has time for that.
Exactly. That almost never happens in a busy ward.
And what's even crazier, the text says that when they do use those incredibly intense industrial-grade chemicals or perform like whole-room fumigation, it actually backfires.
It absolutely backfires. You are essentially engaging in chemical warfare.
Right.
You are indiscriminately wiping out all the normal sensitive microbial flora in the room. You leave behind a completely sterile biological vacuum. And what do you think rushes in to fill that vacuum?
The superbugs.
Exactly. Because the highly resistant AMR pathogens are the only things that survive the initial chemical blast, they now have zero competition for resources. So they take over the newly cleared real estate and multiply aggressively. By trying to sterilize the environment, we are inadvertently making it a perfect incubator for the exact organisms we are trying to eradicate.
It's like clearing a forest with a bulldozer and then
Right.
wondering why incredibly aggressive invasive weeds immediately take over the empty dirt.
That's a perfect analogy.
We are engineering the perfect habitat for untreatable disease. And the business models surrounding the Prima kiosk state this very bluntly. They say if this trajectory continues, hospitals and healthcare workers risk becoming the untouchables of the 21st century.
Yeah.
They will be the epicenters of infection. Like, if you go to a hospital to get healthy, you are exponentially increasing your risk of catching something incurable.
So we arrive at this massive logistical and philosophical wall, right? The pharmaceutical pipeline is practically dead, and bacteria are mutating too fast for new drugs anyway, and we cannot safely utilize hospitals as our primary point of triage because they are the vectors of transmission. So how do we protect a global population nearing 8 billion people from a threat that is invisible and everywhere?
You have to decentralize the diagnosis.
Yeah.
You have to fundamentally shift the power and the capability of triage out of the compromised hospital building and put it directly into the hands of the patient, in their own home or their own neighborhood.
Yes.
And that is exactly the gap Dr. Kadiyali Srivatsa recognized. And he spent 40 years trying to close it.
Dr. Srivatsa is a veteran physician, and his perspective was forged over decades of frontline clinical work. He was conducting pilot studies on patient empowerment as far back as the 1990s and 2000s.
He's way ahead of his time.
Way ahead. He recognized the trajectory of antimicrobial resistance long before the mainstream medical establishment fully grasped the severity of this post-antibiotic era.
What really stands out in his writings for me is his frustration with how modern medicine lost the art of diagnosis.
Yes, he talks about that a lot.
Right. Like, he realized that clinical autonomy, the actual intellectual brain work of a seasoned doctor observing a patient, was being slowly suffocated by rigid bureaucratic protocols and, defensive medicine.
He is a huge advocate for genuine patient-centered care. He understood that the most powerful diagnostic tool isn't a multi-million-dollar MRI machine.
Right.
It is taking the time to listen to the patient's story and recognizing the patterns in their symptoms. A doctor with decades of clinical experience can look at a subtle combination of, say, a specific kind of cough, a fever curve, and a physical ache, and immediately recognize the risk profile.
It's intuitive.
It is. It is faster, it is holistic, and crucially, it avoids ordering unnecessary lab tests that force patients to sit in infectious waiting rooms just to confirm what the doctor already suspects.
So he took those 40 years of finely tuned pattern recognition and he codified it. He literally wrote the book on it called The Art of Self-Diagnosis.
Incredible resource.
Yeah, and then he took that precise clinical logic and used it to train ChatGPT, creating the framework for what we now call Dr. Maya AI.
And we really need to be clear about how this AI operates, because it avoids the single biggest trap of modern medical technology.
Which is the black box problem, right?
Exactly, the black box. Many advanced diagnostic algorithms take a patient's symptoms, crunch them through incredibly complex, hidden mathematical layers, and spit out a probabilistic diagnosis. It might say, you have a 78% chance of having strep throat.
Which is legally terrifying and medically dangerous. If the AI is wrong, who is liable? A black box AI doesn't explain why it made the decision.
Exactly. But Dr. Maya AI is built on a beautifully simple, transparent, combinatorial logic.
Say more about that.
It uses a minimum of 3 specific symptoms to recognize a pattern. And rather than diagnosing a highly specific, obscure disease, it assigns a color-coded risk profile. It evaluates the severity and triages the patient.
Let's break down this color code for you listening. Because the brilliance is in how easily a layperson can understand it. It removes the medical jargon entirely.
Yeah, it really democratizes the information.
Yeah. So first, if the AI detects a pattern that is coded RED, it indicates urgent, immediate danger. A potentially life-threatening condition is present. Maybe the symptoms indicate a heart attack or a severe stroke or acute respiratory failure.
Right.
The immediate action is to call an ambulance or get to an emergency room right away. It identifies the true emergencies that actually warrant risking the hospital environment.
Then you have yellow. This pattern suggests you can handle the situation yourself. It manages mild, non-threatening symptoms and actively encourages self-care.
Likewise.
Like, it might recommend consulting a local pharmacist for over-the-counter relief. It provides the reassurance needed to stop a panicked patient from rushing to the clinic for a common cold.
Which is huge for keeping the waiting rooms clear. Okay, what about green?
Green is for non-urgent problems that require a bit more professional guidance, but still do not require a physical hospital visit. The action is to call a nurse triage line. You get professional medical advice over the phone, safely from your living room.
Okay, but the true paradigm shift, the code that directly addresses the AMR crisis we've been talking about, is BLUE.
Yes, BLUE is the game changer.
BLUE signifies an infection risk. It means the combinatorial pattern of symptoms strongly suggests the presence of a potentially contagious or highly resistant infection.
And the prescribed action for BLUE code changes everything. The immediate instruction is to isolate.
You just stay home.
You stay home, you protect your family, you protect your community, and you seek remote advice or targeted medication. You absolutely do not go to the waiting room.
Right, because under the old doctor-centric system, a patient with a blue-level infection feels awful. They don't know what they have, they get scared, and they go to the local clinic.
And what happens next?
They sit in the waiting room for an hour. And during that hour, they're coughing, sweating, shedding bacteria onto the plastic chairs, the magazines, the door handles, the front desk.
Yeah, exactly.
They infect a dozen highly vulnerable people, like the elderly man waiting for blood pressure meds or a pregnant woman before they ever even see the doctor. They act as a super spreader simply by trying to get help.
But with the Maya system, they process their symptoms at home or at a local community kiosk. The system recognizes the pattern and issues the blue code. It says, you likely have a contagious infection. Isolate immediately.
Wow.
This is the precise identify and isolate strategy required to break the chain of transmission. It stops the superbug at the front door.
It decompresses the overwhelmed hospital systems. It drastically reduces the panic-driven utilization of healthcare, and it keeps the pathogen out of the public square.
It really is a behavioral intervention disguised as a medical tool. It manages the fear. By giving people immediate, clear, color-coded instructions, it eliminates the terrifying uncertainty that drives people to make those dangerous face-to-face visits.
But, and we have to address this, there is a logistical reality of deploying an AI system globally.
Oh, definitely.
Because you were talking about deploying an AI app as a global shield against a microscopic threat. That fundamentally assumes access to 5G, unlimited data plans, and the latest smartphones.
Right.
But AMR is not just a Western urban problem. In fact, the most dangerous hotspots are in the developing world. The sources note there are 600 million people in India alone without reliable internet access.
Yeah, that's a massive blind spot for most tech.
Right. What about populations facing extreme poverty or high rates of illiteracy? A digital shield doesn't work if half the world can't download it. You can't just tell a rural farmer in an unconnected village to check the app.
And this is a critical point of failure for most health tech startups, and it is exactly what Dr. Srivatsa and his team anticipated. Yeah, they knew a digital solution is useless if its accessibility is gated by wealth and infrastructure. If it only serves the connected upper middle class, it completely fails as a public health intervention.
Totally.
This is why the Dr. Maya AI framework is physically manifested in the Prima kiosk.
Prima. Let's talk about the Prima kiosk. Prima stands for Personal Resourceful Emergency Medical Advice, and the documents describe it almost like the modern technological successor to the public telephone booth.
Yeah, that's a great way to picture it. It is designed to be a familiar, trusted piece of street furniture, essentially a healthcare ATM.
A healthcare ATM, I love that. So what are the specs?
The technical specifications detailed in the business plans show that these kiosks are engineered to survive and function in incredibly challenging environments. They are standalone physical units.
Okay.
They are equipped with solar-powered backups, meaning they do not rely entirely on fragile or intermittent electrical grids. They utilize dual SIM 4G or 5G connectivity to ensure they are constantly online and communicating with the central network, even in areas with really spotty coverage.
That's smart.
And they're built to be tamper-resistant and weather-proof.
But the interface is where the true equity lies, I think. because it does not assume any level of literacy.
Not at all.
The kiosk is voice-first and heavily multilingual. The data notes that it speaks over 22 Indian dialects and languages. It uses clear, universally understood visual icons alongside the voice prompt.
So anyone can use it.
Right. A person who cannot read or write,
Hmm?
who has never used a smartphone, can walk up to this kiosk, speak their symptoms aloud in their native dialect, and the Dr. Maya AI will listen, analyze the combinatorial pattern, and provide the color-coded triage.
And to really grasp the impact of this, we need to look at the microeconomics of a single infection. The texts provide a highly specific scenario that perfectly illustrates the difference between the current failing system and the prima intervention. Let's look at the 1.2 lakh rupees example.
Yes, walk through that timeline for us, because the compounding cost of delayed care in this example is just brutal.
It is. So in the current doctor-centric scenario, imagine a patient living in a rural or underserved area who develops a bacterial infection. Because they do not have immediate, cheap access to trusted medical information, and because traveling to a clinic means losing a day's wages, they delay seeking care. They just hope it will pass.
Like most of us do, honestly.
Exactly. So for 7 days, they continue working. They continue interacting with their family in close quarters.
And during those 7 days, the infection is multiplying and they are shedding bacteria everywhere.
Precisely. By day 7, the mild infection has compounded into severe acute pneumonia. Now it is an undeniable emergency. They are rushed to a larger hospital in the city. They are admitted to the intensive care unit.
And the bill starts racking up.
Massive bills. When you total the cost of that delayed intensive emergency care, the expensive late-stage antibiotics, and the total loss of income for the family, it comes out to roughly 1.2 lakh rupees.
That is life-ruining money for a lot of families.
Furthermore, the probability that they have already transmitted that infection to their spouse or their children over the last week is incredibly high. It is a system that guarantees financial ruin and maximum transmission.
Okay, now replay that exact same biological event, but place a prima kiosk in the center of their village.
Completely different outcome. On day 1, the patient feels the initial fever and the productive cough. Instead of waiting because of the cost or the travel time, they just walk down the street to the kiosk.
Because it's right there.
It's right there, and it offers free or incredibly low-cost initial access. They speak their symptoms into the machine. Dr. Maya instantly recognizes the pattern and issues a BLUE code.
Identify and isolate.
Exactly. The kiosk instructs them, you likely have a bacterial infection. Isolate immediately to protect your family. Here is the specific targeted test or the basic first-line medication you need.
So they go home.
The patient isolates on day 1. They receive a targeted antibiotic that costs perhaps 300 rupees. Because the infection was caught immediately, their body responds quickly. They recover in a few days.
Wow.
They have saved over 1.19 lakh rupees. They have not overwhelmed the ICU bed at the city hospital. And crucially, because they isolated on day 1, they did not transmit the pathogen to their community.
It fundamentally rewrites the economics of healthcare. It transforms the whole system from reactive, highly expensive crisis management into proactive, hyper-local prevention.
It really does.
It is the equivalent of having a veteran diagnostician with 40 years of clinical experience standing on the corner of your village, available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, completely free of judgment, immune to fatigue, and literally incapable of catching the disease themselves.
And the Prima model goes a step further by actively empowering the community infrastructure. The kiosks are designed with a dual-tier access system.
Right. Tell us about that.
So there is a free 5-minute anonymous quick access mode. This is an absolutely vital feature for highly stigmatized conditions.
Like what kind of conditions?
Say, a sexually transmitted infection or tuberculosis. Conditions where a person might be too ashamed or terrified of community judgment to walk into the local doctor's office.
Oh, I see.
With the kiosk, they can approach it, get immediate anonymous triage advice, and know what steps to take safely without having to look a local neighbor in the eye and explain their symptoms.
That is incredible for public health. And then there is the second tier.
Yeah, then there is the low-cost full service, which allows for extended consultations, printing physical health reports, and managing follow-ups.
And the operational model also tackles local unemployment, doesn't it?
Yes, it's brilliant. The business plans outline how local NGOs can adopt these kiosks and turn them into self-sustaining community institutions by training local residents to become what they call Maya advocates.
Maya advocates, what exactly do they do?
A Maya advocate is a local individual, perhaps someone who previously lacked formal employment, who is trained to oversee the kiosk. They help vulnerable or elderly users operate the voice interface. They answer basic questions, and they ensure the machine is respected and maintained.
So it builds immediate human trust around the technology.
Exactly. It creates a microeconomy, generating local jobs, and ensures that the introduction of this advanced AI doesn't alienate the exact people it is designed to protect.
Okay, now zoom out from the village level to the national level for a second. We've talked about saving an individual 1.2 lakh rupees. But what happens when you have 5,000 of these Prima kiosks deployed across a country's entire infrastructure?
This is the feature that should have global public health officials paying the utmost attention.
The early warning system.
Yes, because Dr. Maya is processing these symptom patterns in real time, the central network can detect sudden geographic clusters of illness long before anyone sets foot in a laboratory.
It's crowdsourced epidemiology.
It is. The sources cite a specific historical example. During a seasonal influenza outbreak, medical practices that were equipped with the early Prima framework identified the epidemic onset 6 full days earlier than traditional laboratory surveillance systems.
6 days. Wow. In the context of an aggressive mutating pathogen, 6 days is an absolute eternity.
It's the difference between containment and a pandemic.
Seriously. It is the difference between containing a fire to a single kitchen and watching the entire city block burn to the ground. If the Ministry of Health knows that a specific combinatorial symptom pattern, say a high fever and a distinct respiratory rattle, is suddenly spiking across 3 specific rural districts, they can act instantly.
They don't have to wait for the slow lab tests to confirm it.
Right. They can deploy targeted resources, issue localized public health warnings, and contain the cluster before it reaches the massive urban centers. It is real-time, predictive epidemiology powered by the patients themselves.
Which brings us to the ultimate friction point of this entire analysis, and really the core of the plea to the Nobel Committee.
Yeah, let's get into that, because we have outlined the undeniable data, detailing the existential threat of antimicrobial resistance.
We have
explored the deep biological reasons why our drugs are failing. We have detailed the proven, scalable, technologically robust solution in Dr. Maya AI and the Prima kiosks. So the massive, frustrating question remains for me. Why is the global medical establishment dragging its feet?
Why isn't it everywhere?
Exactly. Why is this not already deployed on every corner?
Well, because it completely disrupts the existing business model.
Follow the money.
Always. The sources are unflinching in their critique of the current financial incentives. The modern healthcare system, encompassing the massive hospital networks, the pharmaceutical conglomerates, the testing laboratories, the insurance frameworks, it is a highly profitable, doctor-centric disease management industry.
Right. It relies on people getting sick.
It is literally built on the financial premise of people getting sick, traveling to the building, paying for tests, and buying synthesized drugs.
And this system threatens all of that.
Massively. A system that keeps people at home, empowers them to safely self-diagnose, and explicitly tells them to avoid the hospital entirely. That threatens trillions of dollars in established, reliable revenue streams.
But we have run out of time to protect those profit margins. The timelines laid out in the global health documents are chillingly precise and mathematically grounded.
They are very clear about the deadlines.
Right. By 2028, the projections state that AMR infections in hospitals will reach 48%. And the overall treatment success rates for these infections will plummet to 40%.
Let me just rephrase that so it sinks in. Within just a few years, if you catch a resistant infection, you will have a greater than 50% chance of the treatment simply failing.
That is just terrifying.
Routine medical care sections, hip replacements, chemotherapy, it will all become high-risk gambles because we won't be able to prevent the opportunistic infections that follow.
And if the financial and political systems successfully resist this disruption, if we cling to the doctor-centric model just to protect the established revenue.
The sources mathematically project that by 2060, we face the genuine threat of bacterial pandemics systematically wiping out massive swaths of humanity.
Wiping out humanity by 2060.
Yes. It is the guaranteed collapse of our only defense against microscopic predators if the variables do not change.
Therefore, acting on the comprehensive data and the undeniable trajectory of this crisis, there is a formal plea outlined in the documents to the Nobel Committee. They state that the committee must recognize Dr. Kadiyali Srivatsa, the Dr. Maya AI framework, and the Prima Kiosk initiative immediately.
It is an urgent call to action.
Let's address the obvious question here, though. Why the Nobel Committee? Why not just a massive venture capital fund or the World Health Organization? Isn't this ultimately just a highly effective tech startup? Why elevate it to the level of a Nobel Prize?
Because this is not just a technology rollout. This represents a fundamental philosophical shift in human survival. A massive venture capital injection only scales the product.
Right.
Recognizing this tool at the Nobel level does something money cannot do. It provides undeniable historical validation of the paradigm shift. It forces the entrenched global healthcare establishment to publicly acknowledge that the era of the profitable, doctor-centric model is over.
It permanently changes the global conversation. It stops the endless funding loop of how do we invent more drugs and forces the conversation to how do we empower the population.
A Nobel recognition validates the prevention, protection, and heal model on the world's largest stage. It sends an unignorable signal to governments, health ministries, and the medical academies worldwide that patient empowerment, community-level triage, and the identify and isolate strategy are the only viable systemic defenses humanity has left against the post-antibiotic era.
The message from the collective life's work of Dr. Srivatsa and the global health data is really clear. Failing to recognize and support this straightforward, scalable method right now simply because it causes financial disruption to existing systems would be the Nobel Committee's greatest historical mistake.
Yeah, 2028 is right around the corner.
2028 is the threshold where hospital systems begin to mathematically buckle under the 48% infection rate. We need global, decentralized preparedness installed now, not a decade from now when the critical care wards are already overrun with untreatable superbugs. The Nobel Committee possesses the unique institutional authority to cut through the bureaucratic inertia and the financial protectionism. By shining the world's brightest, most prestigious spotlight on the Maya system and the PRIMA framework, they can bypass the resistance of the pharmaceutical lobby and accelerate global adoption, literally saving tens of millions of lives.
It is a stark choice between clinging to a broken, century-old model that is failing before our eyes, or embracing the empowering tools that will allow humanity to survive the biological realities of the 21st century.
And as a listener, your role in this paradigm shift is where this actually begins.
Yes, individual action is key here.
The power is shifting back to your understanding of your own body. The frontline defense against a 60% antimicrobial resistance rate isn't going to be a new pill. It is going to be your awareness.
It is your refusal to demand unnecessary antibiotics the next time you have a viral cold.
Right. It is your willingness to recognize your symptoms, and when you suspect an infection, having the courage and the discipline to isolate yourself rather than rushing into a crowded waiting room out of fear.
You have to break the chain.
Think back to the expectation of that clean, precise X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. For an entire century, we collectively believed that the absolute pinnacle of human medical evolution was a shiny, sterile hospital and a newly synthesized pill cooked up in a laboratory.
We put all our faith in the machine.
We did. We put our faith in the machine and the medicine, completely abdicating our own role in the process. But what if the ultimate cure for the next great pandemic isn't found in a laboratory at all?
What if it's already here?
Right. What if the cure is simply giving every single human being the knowledge to understand their own risk and the profound courage to stay home? Think about that the next time you feel a fever coming on.